Hey, what's cracking YouTube? I am back and ready to talk about Star Wars. Shout out to the Geeks and Gamers crew. Yes, I'm filling in for Jeremy this time. Don't click off too fast. So I'm going to be talking about whether Star Wars is dead. I know a lot of people think it is. I personally don't think it's dead yet. But I think if they keep going in this current direction under Disney, it will soon be dead. I don't like saying it, but that's how I feel. I'm not saying you have to feel that way. If you like the current direction of Disney Star Wars, it's all good, brah. It's all good. You can just keep thinking that and going on your merry ways. But there are a lot of people who think the opposite. And this article is a good summation of one person's point of view. So we'll get to this article then. And by the way, I'm SC from SC Reviews. Go check out my channel if you want. So let's get to this article, shall we? It's by Jason Perlow, and he works for zdnet.com. The title is, Star Wars is Dead. Gen Xers, get over it. Get the hell over it, you bums. Let the past die. Kill it if you have to. No truer words about Disney's multi-billion-dollar franchise have ever been spoken. Something had been eating at me the last few days and I couldn't put my finger on it. Was it work-related stress? The usual holiday malaise? The never-ending horribleness of the daily news cycle? And then it dawned on me. Star Wars was bothering me. Yes, The Last Jedi had gotten under my skin. I walked out of that film with a sense of anger and disappointment I'd never quite felt before. Indeed, I also had that feeling with the previous movie, The Force Awakens. But I didn't quite exit the theatre as completely and utterly pissed off about the film itself as I was with this one. I can understand that. I felt a disturbance in the Force, as if millions of fans cried out in anger. The first truly great franchised sci-fi fantasy property. Now that I've had time to digest my feelings and think about it analytically, I understand why I am angry, and I suspect I know why many people in my social circle are angry about it as well. Star Wars occupies a lofty position in our popular culture. It's a uniquely American phenomenon, and its influence is all over the entertainment industry, particularly sci-fi and fantasy. It is the first truly great franchise sci-fi fantasy property, and the first to spawn a multi-billion-dollar industry in terms of merchandising and licensed products. True, Star Trek came first with a television debut in 1966. But it wasn't until after the first Star Wars came out in 1977 that Star Trek and the other large franchises that emerged afterward, such as the various superhero films from Marvel and DC, The Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, and juvenile series such as The Hunger Games, parentheses, and its various dystopian copycats targeted towards young adults, really came into their own. Star Wars is also unique because it has endured without reboots. It is a contiguous storyline with a vast canon of material, mostly crafted by a single creator, George Lucas, who liberally borrowed themes from the swashbuckling films of the 1930s, westerns, and even samurai movies he saw as a child and young adult to create his cultural masterpiece. Star Trek also has canon, but it is scattered. It's not as tightly connected, it is inconsistent, and it has been more influenced by many more writers, with a lot more of retconning to compensate for so many people getting involved in the mix. It doesn't have a well-formed mythos per se. I disagree with that. As a fan of Star Trek, I have to disagree with that. It's not as tightly connected. It's pretty tightly connected. Well, there have been many writers and many incarnations of Star Trek. I do disagree with that. While the characters are important, the overall vision and mission statement of that show is what has held the franchise together. Change in Star Trek is accepted as the norm. You want to talk about Star Trek Discovery? People aren't accepting that. Well, the general public does. But like hardcore fans of Star Trek, the ones I've heard speak about it, no, they're not. There's a limit to change, I think. If you want to change it that much, that's a big change. We may grumble about it, but it's easy for us to move on from one iteration to another, especially if the storylines are good and the characters engage us. The storylines are good and the characters engage us. Can that be related to the current iteration of Star Wars? It can. Just answering my own question. It was rhetorical. And it's television, so there is much more expository material to reflect on. That's true. For those of us who grew up with the original Star Wars trilogy of films, this is our canon. That is our franchise. The actors in those original films are our heroes. In some respects, we think of these people and characters as extensions of family. The actors are old enough to be parental figures for many of us original fans. So when you mess with our family dynamic, it hurts. We were children when we saw the original films. I was 8 years old when I saw the first film in its opening run in the theatre. Star Wars was very much a product of the 1970s, just as Generation X is, and our memories of the movie are also mixed with our memories of childhood, as rose-coloured as it may be. Over the last 20 years, Generation X has felt like it has received the short end of the stick, that society stopped giving a crap about us, even though we ended up doing a lot of the heavy lifting. Now, many of us are approaching or just hit age 50. We are in our prime earning years, and a number of us are becoming grandparents. Are you getting uncomfortable yet, my Gen Xers? I've only just begun. Oh, here we go. The second wave of Star Wars films that emerged in the late 1990s, the prequels, were an opportunity for us to share our enthusiasm of the original films with our children, who were finally old enough to appreciate them. We endlessly debated the order in which to see them, the prequels first or the originals first. It was a fun exercise. The origin stories of the original characters built up a mythos and answered a number of questions we had in the back of our minds for decades. Perhaps we didn't entirely agree about the casting, character choices, and storyline George Lucas created for those films, parentheses, Jar Jar. But for the most part, we enjoyed them. It filled in a backstory we were always interested in, and yet it still felt familiar. That's a good point. They definitely did feel like Star Wars, like they were influenced by George Lucas, whereas now you don't get that same feeling. I think many of us Gen Xers would have been fine with the series ending with the prequels. At the end of Return of the Jedi, the Empire was vanquished. The Skywalker saga was done. With the prequels, we now understood Vader's origins, the fall from grace, the final redemption. That was as much closure as we all really needed, and we could imagine privately how the characters would live out their lives in peace afterward. It didn't need further exposition. Just with that, the prequels. But the thing with the films, it's difficult because I really like the Clone Wars TV show. So if you're not talking about EU stuff and just the films, would it have been bad if they ended after the prequels? I mean, I could live without the 3 films they brought out since. Right? I mean, Rogue One, in my opinion, is the best of them. But even that, if they didn't make it, would it bother me? No. But I would be bothered if they didn't create the Clone Wars TV show. I would definitely be bothered about that, because that's an awesome show. But we can't be so naive. Star Wars was bought by Disney for $4 billion in 2012. You don't spend that kind of money on a franchise without expecting a huge return on investment. Disney doesn't do anything half-assed when it comes to marketing and merchandising. You got that right. That's one part of the game they know. As successful as he was, George Lucas was a rank amateur in this regard by comparison. He wasn't going to take Star Wars to the next level. He was done with it, so he cashed it in. Again, I don't really agree about that. I don't agree with the decision to sell in the first place. I think that was a bad decision. I do understand there were circumstances surrounding that with ILM, and the reaction to the prequels from certain fans wasn't good, and I understand there was other stuff going on, and he's getting old. I think he was getting into his 70s, wasn't he, almost? Or he might have been, can't remember. But there were other issues there. It wasn't just him just cashing it in. The original fans, the Gen Xers, who are now hitting their 5th decade of life, are not going to spend big bank on new Star Wars playsets. Okay, maybe we'll get a couple of Tervis cups, iPhone cases, t-shirts, etc. Guilty as charged. But the big money is to be made on the millennials and their children. Gen X is a freaking rounding error of potential sales in comparison to this demographic. That's true. But you cannot introduce a new generation of buyers into an existing franchise of merchandise without context. The Force Awakens served its purpose of introducing new characters and plotline while tying it into the old. To move forward, Disney had to tie up the loose ends and started killing off characters from the old story arc, so it can really get the cash machine moving with the new merchandise. For the mouse has theme parks in Florida to build and action figures to pump out of molds in China by the millions. Unfortunately, in real life, shortly after the film's release, we lost Carrie Fisher, so seeing the way her character was dealt with in The Last Jedi was that much more painful and an insult to injury for many of us. That was an absolute insult, what they did to Carrie Fisher in this movie, in The Last Jedi. That Mary Poppins scene, Mary Poppins, yo, was an absolute disgrace. When I saw that in the cinema, I couldn't believe what was going on. I was like laughing at how bad it was. And I was thinking, is this actually happening on the screen in front of me? Like, Rian Johnson thought, yep, this is going to be a good idea. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? I'm not going to go into spoiler territory, but I think a lot of us Gen Xers are not happy with how it ends for Luke either. It doesn't reflect on the character well, in my opinion, and it doesn't give us full closure, and we'll never get closure with Leia. Think about that. But let's face it, the actors were getting on in years. You can't have a transition to a new plotline and new characters without including them somehow, so we have to say goodbye. It hurts because the original characters are in their mid-60s or older. Prince's, Harrison Ford for example, is 2 years older than my father. And we are now at the age where our own parents are touching their twilight years. So all of this hits us right in the feels. The millennials and Gen Ys will never completely understand why we are so upset. They don't have the context. One of the major themes in The Last Jedi is letting things go. Kylo Ren actually poses this eventuality to Rey in their ultimate confrontation, in the throne room of Supreme Leader Snoke's flagship. He says to Rey, quite bluntly, in his trademark emo style, quote, "Let the past die, kill it if you have to," end quote. This is not just a maxim for the characters in the film. That's the only way Disney could bring in an entirely new generation of fans for decades to come and to capitalise on a $4 billion investment. Ditching the old fans to bring in new fans to recoup the investment. Sound familiar? For us Gen Xers, who filled George Lucas's coffers over the decades, Star Wars is dead. It is finished. Our fandom and our emotional investment are in the past. You can't go home again. It is being killed off because of a business decision, one that you can argue is being rightfully made due to how much money is at stake. We are being discarded. Except, of course, for when the holiday season comes and we have to buy our grandchildren Star Wars toys, just as our own parents and grandparents did for us. And that is the end of the article. And again, that article was by Jason Perlow from zdnet.com. Never heard of it before. And he did it for Tech Broiler. Never heard of that either. But it was a great article there about Star Wars being dead in many people's eyes. Many of the older generation of fans, the original fans, have moved on and don't really like the current direction of Star Wars. And the main culprit in that, according to this writer, is Disney's takeover of the franchise. But also putting some of the blame on George Lucas for selling in the first place. But like I said, there were other circumstances around him selling. It wasn't just him trying to make cash. He was getting older. The prequel reaction wasn't great. I think it's been overhyped a bit how bad it was, but it wasn't great. And also, he also got a commitment from Kathleen Kennedy that they would be basically just respecting the material. And I'm not sure, I don't think you can say they have done that. That's just my opinion. I think it's hard to justify The Last Jedi. And The Force Awakens, again, rewatching that, it's not great. It's not great. But that's just my personal opinion. Who am I? Who am I? I'm just a bum on the internet. So go check out my channel if you want, SC Reviews. Thanks to Jeremy, Geeks and Gamers, for letting me make this video. Tell me what you think about the article in the comments below. Do you believe Star Wars is dead? I'd be interested to read your comments. Hope you're having a good day as always. Catch you later. Peace.